My name is Alex, and I'm 25. I never expected to be the main character in a twisted family drama, but here I am, thanks to my recently deceased grandmother. She passed away last year, leaving behind a sizable estate, a house worth about $750,000 and another $300,000 in cash and assets. The weird part, my dad, Mark, 50, and my brother, David, 28, got completely cut out of the will. Grandma left everything to me. I was blindsided. I didn't even know there was a will reading until Grandma's lawyer called me a week after the funeral. Walking into that lawyer's office and seeing my two aunts, I felt a knot in my stomach. This wasn't like Grandma at all. The lawyer explained the situation. 1/3 to Aunt Sarah, 1/3 to Aunt Emily, and 1/3 to me. My aunts didn't even flinch, which meant they already knew. But why me? I'm just starting out. No wife, no kids, no real career to speak of. My dad, on the other hand, has always been Mr. Responsible. Successful business, family man, the one who shows up for everything. It just didn't add up. The lawyer, sensing my confusion, slid an envelope across the table. "Your grandmother wanted you to have this," he said. Inside was a handwritten letter from Grandma. Seeing her familiar handwriting brought tears to my eyes, but as I read the letter, those tears turned cold. Grandma revealed a bombshell. My dad isn't David's biological father. Apparently, my mom was already pregnant when she met my dad in college. They fell in love, and Dad decided to raise David as his own. But Granddad disowned my dad, furious about the situation. Grandma, though, secretly stayed in touch with Dad all those years. I remember her occasional visits when I was a kid, but they always seemed casual, nothing out of the ordinary. I never knew about the family feud raging beneath the surface. It wasn't until Granddad died that Grandma openly reconnected with us, and even then, there was always this tension, this resentment towards my dad. Cutting my dad out of the will was her final statement. She felt betrayed by his secrecy and wanted to acknowledge the sacrifices I'd made. Honestly, I don't know what sacrifices she meant. Maybe she saw me as the underdog, always in David's shadow. Maybe she wanted to give me a chance to build my own life. Now, I'm stuck with this secret, this ticking time bomb. My dad has no idea I know, and neither does David. I haven't even told my mom, though I suspect she might be in on it. And to make matters worse, my dad is blowing up my phone, demanding to know about the will and if it can be contested. When I told him it was final, he asked point blank, "You're going to share it with me and your brother, right?" What was I supposed to say? This money wasn't meant for him. Plus, with the revelation about David, shouldn't he know the truth before we start dividing up the cash? This whole thing is a mess, and I'm caught right in the middle. I have no idea what to do next. But one thing's for sure, this inheritance is going to change my family forever. The days after the will reading were a blur. My dad's calls were relentless, practically every hour. At first, I dodged them. How could I face him? It wasn't just about the money, it was the weight of the secret, the knowledge that could shatter our family. Every ring of my phone felt like a countdown to an explosion. After a day of silence, I finally answered. He didn't even say hello, just launched right into it. "We need to talk," he said, his voice strained. "I think there's been some kind of mistake. Your grandmother would never do this to me. Maybe the lawyers got it wrong." "Dad, the lawyer didn't get it wrong." I cut him off. "It's final. The will is legally binding." A long pause hung in the air. When he finally spoke again, his voice was softer, laced with hurt. "You know what's the right thing to do, right?" I hesitated, a lump forming in my throat. "I haven't decided yet," I mumbled, which wasn't entirely a lie. I truly didn't know what to do. Growing up, it always felt like Dad saved his best for David. He was always there for David's sports games, cheering him on, even coaching his little league team. But my piano recitals or art shows barely got a mention. David's achievements were family celebrations, while mine were just hobbies. The message was clear. David was the star, and I was just there. And now, Knowing that David wasn't even his biological son, it all made a twisted kind of sense. It explained the favoritism, the extra attention, the way Dad always put David on a pedestal. I remembered when David was made captain of his high school soccer team, Dad threw a huge barbecue, inviting everyone he knew. But when I won a statewide writing competition that same year, he barely acknowledged it. He gave David the keys to his classic Mustang for prom, but lectured me about responsibility when I asked to borrow the car for a college interview. It was a constant pattern of subtle snubs and blatant preferences. If David needed help with anything, Dad would drop everything. But when I needed a hand painting my room, he was suddenly busy. In trying to make David feel like his own, he'd neglected his actual son. I felt like an idiot for not seeing it sooner. How could I have missed something so obvious? My mom was strangely silent about the whole thing. She knew about the will reading but hadn't asked me a single question. That wasn't like her at all. Usually she was in the middle of every family matter, whether it concerned her or not. Her silence was deafening, and it made me wonder how much she knew. About a week after the meeting, I decided to confront her. She was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables. "Mom, can we talk?" I asked. She looked up, her hands pausing for a moment before resuming their work. "Of course, what's on your mind?" "It's about the inheritance," I said. Her expression didn't change, but I noticed her shoulders tense. "What about it?" "Why didn't Grandma leave anything to Dad?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She didn't answer right away. Finally, she put down the knife and turned to face me. "Your grandmother had her reasons," she said carefully, "but that's between her and your father." Her evasiveness made me even more suspicious. "Mom, did you know?" I asked, "about why she made the decision she did?" She sighed, a weary sound that seemed to carry years of unspoken burdens. "I had a feeling," she admitted, "but I didn't know for sure. And if I'm being honest, I'm not sure I want to know." Her answer left me with more questions than answers, but I didn't push. It was clear she wasn't ready to talk about it, and frankly, I wasn't sure I was ready to hear what she had to say. Meanwhile, my dad's frustration was growing. He started showing up at my place unannounced, demanding to talk. One time, he even brought David with him, as if having backup would somehow make me cave. David, predictably, sided with Dad. "This isn't fair," he said. "Grandma must have been confused when she wrote the will. She loved all of us equally." I wanted to laugh. Loved all of us equally? If only he knew how blind he was to the reality of our family. But instead of arguing, I kept my mouth shut. I wasn't ready to reveal the secret in the letter. Not yet. The tension was becoming unbearable. Every conversation with my dad felt like a negotiation. Every interaction with David a passive-aggressive guilt trip. My mom's silence only added to the pressure. I felt like I was trapped in a storm with no shelter in sight. And the worst part? I couldn't talk to anyone about it. My friends wouldn't understand, and I didn't trust anyone in my family enough to confide in, so I kept it all bottled up, hoping things would somehow work themselves out. But deep down, I knew that was wishful thinking. This wasn't the kind of problem that just disappeared. One evening, I came home from work to find my dad and David parked outside my apartment. My stomach sank. I'd been dodging their calls for days, hoping they'd back off, but clearly, that wasn't happening. As I walked towards them, they got out of the car. Dad looked irritated, while David had that simmering anger he always got when he didn't get his way. "We need to talk," Dad said, his tone leaving no room for argument. I sighed, unlocking my door. "Fine, come in." The moment we were inside, Dad got straight to the point. "We're not leaving until you explain yourself. This inheritance nonsense ends tonight." I dropped my bag on the counter and leaned against the kitchen island. "What's there to explain? Grandma made her decision. It's not my fault you don't like it." David scoffed, crossing his arms. "Don't act like you don't know this is wrong. That money wasn't just for you. It was supposed to help the whole family. Do you have any idea how much I could use it right now?" "Yeah," I said flatly, "because everything's always about you." "What's that supposed to mean?" he snapped, taking a step closer. "It means," I said, standing up straight, "that you've always been Dad's golden boy. You've gotten everything handed to you your whole life, and now you're mad because this one thing isn't going your way." "That's ridiculous," David said, his voice rising. "I've worked for everything I have." "Oh, really?" I shot back. "Like that car Dad bought you in college? Or the down payment he co-signed on your house? Or maybe the time he paid for your wedding while I got a good luck text when I moved out?" "That's not fair," Dad cut in, his face turning red. "I've done plenty for you, too." "Name one thing," I challenged. "Name one time you've gone out of your way for me the way you have for him." The silence that followed was deafening. My dad looked down, avoiding my gaze, while David shifted uncomfortably. "Look," David said after a moment, his voice softer now. "I know things haven't always been even between you two, but that doesn't mean you can just take this money and shut us out. We're a family. Families stick together." I laughed bitterly. "Family. Don't start preaching about family now. Where was all this family talk when I needed help, when I needed support?" Dad didn't have an answer for that. David, however, wasn't about to back down. "You're being selfish," he said. "This isn't about what Dad did or didn't do. This is about Grandma. She made a mistake, and you're using it to punish us." I shook my head, incredulous. "A mistake? You think this was a mistake? Maybe she finally saw things for what they were. Maybe she wanted to do something for me because no one else ever has." "That's not true," Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I've spent my whole life trying to measure up to him." I gestured towards David, "and nothing I ever did was good enough. But now, for once, I have something that's mine, and you can't stand it." My dad's face fell, and for the first time he looked genuinely remorseful. "I didn't realize you felt that way," he said quietly. "How could you not?" I asked, my frustration boiling over. "You've spent years making it clear who your favorite was, and now you're here demanding that I give up the one thing Grandma left me. Do you even hear yourself?" David took a step forward, his anger bubbling to the surface again. "This isn't about favoritism. This is about what's right. And what's right is splitting the inheritance equally." "What's right," I said, meeting his gaze, "is respecting Grandma's wishes. And if you can't do that, then that's on you, not me." The room fell silent again. The weight of my words hung heavy in the air. My dad finally broke the silence, running a hand through his hair. "Look, maybe we all need some time to cool off, but this conversation isn't over." As he turned to leave, David glared at me one last time. "You're going to regret this," he said. "Maybe," I replied, "but at least I'll know I didn't let anyone bully me into giving up what's mine." The tension with Dad and David had been simmering for weeks, but after their ambush at my apartment, I knew it was only a matter of time before something boiled over. I couldn't shake the anger from our confrontation, but what weighed even heavier on me was the secret I had been keeping. The truth about David's parentage. I wrestled with the idea of telling David the truth. It wasn't my secret to tell, but it felt wrong letting him continue in the dark, especially with all the inheritance drama. If they were going to keep hounding me about the money, they deserved to know why Grandma made her decision. The opportunity came sooner than expected. My dad showed up at my apartment again, this time alone. It was late, just past 9 p.m., and I was settling in for a quiet evening when I heard his knock. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but I knew he wouldn't give up. When I opened the door, he looked more tired than I'd ever seen him. The hard edge in his expression from our last encounter was gone, replaced with something softer, almost pleading. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low. I stepped aside, gesturing for him to come in. He went straight to the living room and sat down on the couch. I stayed by the kitchen counter, keeping some distance between us. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, clasping his hands together. "About how you felt overlooked. I didn't mean to make you feel that way." "It's not just about how I feel," I said. crossing my arms. "It's about how things have always been. You've spent years making excuses for treating me like I didn't matter, and now that Grandma called you out on it, you're scrambling to make it my problem." Dad winced but didn't interrupt. I could see the wheels turning in his head, like he was trying to find the right words. "Finally," he said, "your brother needed more from me. That's just the way it was." "He didn't," I said sharply, cutting him off. "Don't sit there and try to justify it. This isn't just about him needing more. This is about you giving him everything while I got the leftovers." Dad sighed heavily, leaning forward and rubbing his temples. "I did the best I could. You don't understand what it was like trying to hold this family together." "Hold it together?" I shot back. "You mean holding on to a lie?" His head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" It was now or never. I walked over to the coffee table, picking up the letter I'd left there after my last confrontation with him and David. I handed it to him, my hand shaking slightly. "Read this," I said, my voice hard. He hesitated, looking at the envelope like it might bite him, but eventually took it. As he unfolded the letter, I sat down across from him, watching his expression shift from confusion to disbelief to something close to panic. When he finished, he stared at the paper, his hands trembling. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Since the will reading," I replied. "Grandma left it for me." He leaned back against the couch, running a hand through his hair. "She shouldn't have told you. It wasn't her place." "Maybe not," I said, "but she did. And honestly, I'm glad she did. At least now I know the truth." "The truth?" he repeated bitterly, shaking his head. "The truth is complicated." "Is it?" I challenged. "Because it seems pretty straightforward to me. You've been lying to him, lying to both of us, our whole lives." Dad looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and sorrow. "It wasn't a lie. Your brother is my son in every way that matters. Biology doesn't change that." "But it does change things, doesn't it?" I pressed. "You've spent your whole life trying to make him feel like he belongs, and in the process, you pushed me aside. You don't think that had an impact?" "I was trying to do the right thing," he said, his voice breaking. "I was trying to be a good father to both of you." I stood up, pacing the room as my frustration boiled over. "A good father? Do you even hear yourself? You've been so busy compensating for him that you didn't even notice the damage you were doing to me. And now you're here acting like you're the victim because Grandma finally called you out on it." He stood too, his face red with anger. "You don't know what it was like. I loved your mother, but her past. It wasn't easy to accept. I had to fight to prove that I could be the man she needed, the father your brother needed. I sacrificed everything for this family." "And what about me?" I demanded. "What did you sacrifice for me?" The question hung in the air. For a moment, he looked like he might say something, but then his shoulders slumped, and he sat back down. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "I don't know what I could have done differently." His honesty caught me off guard, deflating some of my anger. But it wasn't enough to erase years of resentment. "You could have treated me like I mattered," I said, my voice trembling. "You could have shown me the same love and support you gave him. Instead, you let me feel like I was never good enough." Dad looked down at his hands, his expression heavy with guilt. "I didn't mean to make you feel that way," he said softly. I thought you were strong enough not to need as much from me." "That's not how it works," I said. "You don't get to pick and choose who deserves your attention. I needed you, and you weren't there." We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of everything we'd said settling over us. Finally, Dad looked up at me, his eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking, "for everything. I didn't mean to hurt you." I didn't forgive him. His apology was too little, too late. Words couldn't undo decades of being treated like a second-class son. And now, Armed with the truth, I wasn't about to roll over and let them guilt me out of what was rightfully mine. If anything, his confession confirmed what I already knew. I had spent my entire life being sidelined for someone who wasn't even his own flesh and blood, but I wasn't done yet. After the confrontation at my apartment, I felt suffocated. The truth was out in the open, at least to Dad, but David still remained oblivious, and I knew Dad wasn't going to be the one to enlighten him. A week later, their next move came. I received an email from a lawyer, one my dad had hired. It announced their intention to contest Grandma's will, claiming she wasn't of sound mind when she wrote it. I almost laughed. It was such a desperate, last-ditch attempt to get their hands on something that wasn't meant for them. But I knew it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about control. They couldn't handle the idea of me, the afterthought, having something they couldn't influence. I forwarded the email to my own lawyer with a simple message. Let's end this. The court proceedings were long and brutal. Dad and David pulled every trick in the book to discredit Grandma's decision. They even tried to drag my aunts into it, hoping they'd side with them. But Aunt Sarah and Aunt Emily shut that down fast. They might not have always been close to Grandma, but they respected her wishes. They testified that she was sharp as ever when she made the will, and that she had been clear about her reasons. My lawyer was a shark, and we were prepared. Grandma's letter became a key piece of evidence, though I still hadn't revealed its contents to David. In the end, the court sided with us. Grandma's will stood as written. Dad and David lost their challenge, and the inheritance remained mine. I thought that would be the end of it, but of course it wasn't. David showed up at my door a few days after the ruling, uninvited as usual. He was furious, his face red with anger. He barged past me without waiting for an invitation and started yelling. "This is bull!" he shouted, pacing my living room. "You know this isn't fair. She wasn't in her right mind and you know it." I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall. The court disagreed. "You're just mad you didn't get what you wanted." "It's not about what I want," he snapped. "It's about what's right. Grandma wouldn't have done this if she wasn't being manipulated." I raised an eyebrow. "Manipulated by who exactly? You think Aunt Sarah and Aunt Emily brainwashed her? Or maybe me? The guy who didn't even know he was getting anything until the lawyer called?" "You don't deserve that money," he said, his voice venomous. "You've never had to work for anything. You're just sitting on your ass while Dad and I are busting ours trying to keep everything together." That did it. I laughed, a sharp, bitter laugh that made him stop in his tracks. "You think I've never worked for anything? Are you serious right now? I've been busting my ass my whole life trying to prove myself to Dad, while you got handed everything on a silver platter. The car, the house, the business connections. Don't even try to play the victim here." David sneered. "You're so full of yourself. You think you're better than me because Grandma gave you some money. Newsflash, Alex, you're still nothing." I felt my jaw tighten, but I didn't let his words get to me. Instead, I stepped closer, meeting his glare head-on. "You know what, David? You're right about one thing. I don't need to prove myself to you or Dad anymore. Grandma saw through the act, and now I do too. You can keep being Dad's favorite. I'm done playing your stupid games." He opened his mouth to say something, but I cut him off. "Oh, and before you go running to Dad crying about this, maybe ask him why he never told you the truth about where you come from." That stopped him cold. His eyes narrowed. "What the hell are you talking about?" I grabbed the letter from the coffee table, the same one I had shown Dad, and shoved it into his hands. "Read it. Then come back and tell me how much you think I don't deserve this." David looked at the envelope, then back at me, suspicion and confusion warring on his face. He snatched it from me and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The fallout was immediate. I don't know exactly what happened when David confronted Dad, but a few days later, I got a call from my mom. She was in tears, begging me to talk to David. Apparently, he had moved out of Dad's house and wasn't answering anyone's calls. I told her flat out that it wasn't my problem. "You dragged me into this mess," I said. "You can deal with the consequences." For the first time in my life, I felt free from the guilt, the resentment, the constant need to measure up to their impossible standards. I had the money Grandma left me, but more importantly, I had the truth, and I wasn't afraid to use it. I cut contact with Dad and David after that. My mom still calls occasionally, but our conversations are brief and superficial. She doesn't ask about the inheritance, and I don't offer any updates. As far as I'm concerned, they can all keep each other company. They wanted their golden child so badly. Well, now they have him. Meanwhile, I'm building my own life. I sold Grandma's house and used the money to start my own business, something I'd always dreamed of. It's not all smooth sailing, but for the first time in a long time, I'm living for me, and it feels damn good. The weight of the secret, the years of resentment, the constant feeling of being less than, it's all starting to fade. I'm not angry anymore. Not really. Just disappointed. Disappointed that it took Grandma's death and a bombshell revelation to finally open my eyes to the truth about my family. Some days I wonder if things could have been different. If Dad had been honest, if he'd treated me with the same love and attention he showered on David, would any of this have happened? But then I remember all the slights, the subtle dismissals, the way my accomplishments were always overshadowed by David's. And I realized that even without the secret, the dynamic was always skewed. I used to think I needed their approval, their validation, but I don't anymore. I'm learning to define my own worth, to build my own happiness. It's a journey, and it's not always easy, but it's mine. I've learned a lot about family, about loyalty, and about forgiveness. I've learned that sometimes the people you're closest to can hurt you the most. And I've learned that forgiveness is a choice, one that I'm not ready to make, not yet. Maybe someday I'll be able to talk to Dad and David again, to have an honest conversation about everything that happened. But for now, I need space. I need to heal, to grow, to become the man I was always meant to be, free from the shadow of their expectations. This inheritance wasn't just about the money, it was about freedom. Freedom from the past, from the lies, from the constant need to prove myself. And that's a gift that no amount of money can buy. Grandma's letter was a wake-up call, a chance to rewrite my own story. And that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm taking control of my life, building a future that's authentically mine. It's a future where I'm not defined by my family's dysfunction, but by my own dreams and aspirations. And you know what? It feels pretty damn good story too. I was named, and Remnant is the title of this narrative. In addition, my parents sent me to boarding school following the birth of the golden child, and I refused to see them after school. Mom was upset. Hello, everyone. Even considering writing all of this down has been an adventure, but I reasoned that it would be worth it. Perhaps someone will find it. Here's my narrative then. I'm a 31-year-old man named Ryan. I was raised in this absurdly large estate on a hilltop overlooking the water in San Francisco. You are aware of the kind. There is marble everywhere, unused rooms and enormous chandeliers. On the outside, it probably appeared as like we were living the dream, so I don't believe I'm boasting or anything. However, it was really chilly inside. The people who lived there, not simply the home. My folks. My father was a successful businessman. I am referring to board meetings, well-tailored clothes, and a voice that could draw the attention of mature men. My mother was very concerned about looks. She would hold these elegant gatherings, acting as the ideal hostess and attending to every single detail. But there was one flaw in their idyllic life. Me, as far ago as I can recall, I was aware that their strategy did not include me. My parents want girls. Specifically, 2 of them. Their ideal family was that one. They got me a boy instead. Furthermore, it was immediately apparent that I didn't suit their vision, nor did they do a good job of hiding it. They boasted about me at their gatherings, but I wasn't that child. It was me they put up with, the one they believed to be their error. Nor were they little matters. I heard them fight when I was 5 years old. My mom was screaming at my dad, telling him that she wasn't intended to have girls and that she didn't sign up for this. Not like this. Even though I didn't comprehend every word at the time, I knew enough to know that they were referring to me. My dad attempted to reassure her that they could always fix things and that it wasn't her fault. It wasn't until I was 6 years old, 1 year later, that I realized what repairing it meant. My mother became pregnant. She was joyful than I had seen her in months, and she was radiant. This new infant was the center of attention in the house. To make sure everything was ideal, my mom hired yoga teachers, dietitians, and even a woman known as a doula. It seemed as though everything changed when Lily was born. She was their second chance at the life they desired and their golden child. It was all about her. The day they brought her home will always be in my memory. My mother held Lily as if she were holding the most valuable object in the world. I had never seen my father gaze at me with such pride. As I watched from the corner, I realized that I was no longer a member of this family. They sent me to boarding school a month later. This school was an amazing opportunity, they informed me. They assured me that I would receive the greatest education possible, meet friends for life, and have unforgettable experiences. However, I was aware of the reality. I wasn't welcome there. They sent me across the nation when I was 10 years old, treating me like a parcel they didn't want to take up space in their home. Without a doubt, the school was a fine facility. It wasn't a friendly environment, though. Not for me. The other children were from wealthy households, including kings, CEOs, politicians, and even ordinary people. The fact that I was from a wealthy family didn't matter to them. They took advantage of the fact that they sensed my parents didn't care about me. I was the child. Everybody made fun of it. In the dining hall, they referred to me as the error or the remainder. They would remark things like, "Don't sit with Ryan," while laughing. He wasn't even wanted by his parents. As if it didn't upset me, I would laugh it off. Despite being bullied, I made an effort to avoid playing the victim. However, I was bothered by it. It seemed like they were sticking a dagger a bit deeper each time they uttered it. The feeling of it being true was the hardest part. I think my parents only came to visit once a year, and that was really for show. After looking over my grades and giving me a presentation lesson, they would go. My mother would talk about Lily the entire time she was there. I was merely there in the interim. My uncle Mark was the only one who ever gave a damn. He was the younger brother of my dad, and he was very different. Mark oversaw a group of engine builders at a plant where he worked. He lacked the wealth and status that my parents possessed. They didn't part with him, though. On weekends, when no one else was around, Mark would come see me. He would sit with me, bring me burgers at this tiny cafe down the road, and take me to baseball games. Discussing life. He did not judge or lecture. He simply listened. I felt important for those few hours. The closest thing I had to a parent was Mark. As the years passed, I developed coping skills. I no longer thought my parents would give a damn. I threw myself into school instead. I worked hard even though I wasn't the smartest kid. It provided me with something to concentrate on, not because I wanted to impress them. I reasoned that I would leave their orbit and start a new life if I could just survive. I had moved on from them by the time I graduated. With Lily, they had their ideal family, and I was excluded. I therefore devised a strategy. I applied to universities that were far from home, and I seized the opportunity when I was accepted to a reputable university. My dad, who was presumably pleased to be rid of me permanently, sent me money for tuition and other costs. I didn't give a damn. I just had the impression that I was in charge of my own destiny. I was getting on the aircraft to my new university. It was too heavy for a part of me to get go of. Everything. The years of being ignored. The feeling of never being enough. It stuck with me no matter how far I went. Still, I convinced myself this was my time to start over. A new city, a new life, and perhaps a new me. What I didn't comprehend back then was how hard it would be to leave the past behind. My parents might not have wanted me, but their shadow was always there, hovering, reminding me of where I came from, and no matter how much space I placed between us, it always found a way back into my life. Moving to another nation was like walking into another planet. Everything seemed different, and luckily I wasn't surrounded by anyone who knew my family or my background. No one here gave me the Ryan look, the error or the leftover. I might simply be myself. There was no joke, whomever that was. The pupils were incredibly intelligent, motivated, and competitive. At first, it was frightening, but I was determined to show that I belonged. I studied for hours at the library until my mind was mushy. I worked harder than everybody else, so even though I wasn't the sharpest man in the room, I made up for it. I met Jake that way. I took a financial course with him. This easygoing Torontonian has a sharp sense of humor and a talent for de-emphasizing things. Despite his lack of wealth, he had lofty aspirations. He wasn't afraid to express his desire to start something from scratch and go into the financial industry. We began getting together after class to share ambitious dreams and eat inexpensive takeout. Jake had a talent for seeing chances, which gave me hope that I might overcome the shadow of my family. Then there was Claire Sharp, from a humble upbringing, ambitious, and no-nonsense. She made it plain that she was there to win, and not to follow the old money norms after fighting her way into this university. Late at night, the three of us began chatting about our post-graduation plans while sitting in the common area. Jake wants to launch a new and creative brokerage business. At first, Claire was dubious. She cared more about stability and was more careful. She did, however, finally come around to the notion. And me? I desired it. It seemed like the type of audacious action that would allow me to go past my past. We had a plan by the time we graduated. In New York, we hired a little office. There wasn't much, just 3 laptops that we could almost buy, a few used desks and some used chairs. But we owned it. It was tough to begin with. Newcomers, particularly those without well-known names or established reputations, are not given preferential treatment in the financial industry. On some days, we would return home empty-handed. On other days, we would feel like we had won the lotto when we got a little customer. Jake and Claire, however, never gave me the impression that we were failing. Jake had a knack of ignoring rejection and using every no as motivation to keep pushing. Claire helped us stay grounded so that neither the highs nor the lows could overwhelm us. We worked as a team, and I felt like I was a part of something tangible for the first time. The company began to gather traction after a year of hard work. While we didn't have ostentatious offices or well-known clientele, we did have something that many other businesses didn't: sincere connections with the individuals we collaborated with. My history wasn't as far behind me as I had hoped, despite everything. No matter how far I attempted to keep my parents away from me, they still managed to infiltrate my life. It began with sporadic updates about Lily's most recent accomplishments. I initially chose to disregard the alerts, but they persisted. It went beyond simple upgrades. They seemed to be reminding me of my position, or lack thereof, in the family. What I was doing and the life I was creating for them didn't matter to them. I remained the error. Off they went to boarding school. I opened one of such texts by accident one day. A picture from a recent family gathering was shared by my mother. Lily, wearing a flawless couture dress, was standing between my parents, beaming. It was titled "Our Pride and Joy" by my mom. That was it. Don't bring me up. No indication that I was there at all. I didn't want to confess how much it hurt. In the hopes that Jake and Claire would laugh it off with me, I showed them the email. Claire only shook her head, though. She said, "They don't deserve you." And for some reason, those remarks had a greater impact on me than any insult my parents had ever given me. Though life has a way of reminding you that the past doesn't simply vanish, I made an effort to concentrate on the company. When you least expect it, it resurfaces. A call came in as I was seated at my desk in our little office. It came from one of Uncle Mark's manufacturing workers. He informed me that Mark had been rushed to the hospital after collapsing at work. I went cold. The one consistency in my life was Mark. The only one who ever made me feel important. I tried calling the hospital right away, but it was too late by the time I spoke to someone. Mark had left. I was deeply affected by the news. During some of the darkest years of my life, Mark had been my pillar of support. He wasn't ostentatious or well off, but he was nice. When no one else arrived, he did. And that meant the world to a child who had been rejected. Barely able to comprehend what had transpired, I scheduled the first flight to his location. Only a few of his neighbors and coworkers attended the little burial. My folks didn't show up. Naturally. Years had passed since they last spoke to Mark, and I doubt they even realized he was no longer there. An intense mixture of remorse and rage overcame me as I stood there at the service. I felt guilty for not seeing him more frequently, and for not calling him more to express my rage at how unfair everything was, and how someone like Mark could simply vanish, while my parents continued living their ideal, meaningless life. I met with Mark's attorney to review his will following the funeral. I didn't have high expectations because I had a humble apartment life. What surprised me, though, was that he left me his apartment, his savings, and a few personal belongings, including a stack of handwritten notes he had saved from my boarding school days and an old baseball glove we used to play catch with. The gesture was more important than the cash or possessions. I was family to Mark. He believed that I was someone to whom a legacy should be left, for someone who felt like they didn't belong anywhere as a child. That meant more to me than words could express. Naturally, though, my parents managed to sabotage even that. I received a letter from their attorney a few weeks later. The will was being contested. As Mark's closest relatives, they were arguing that the assets should belong to them because he was mentally ill when he drafted the will. It seemed unbelievable to me. When Mark was alive, my parents had hardly acknowledged him. What little Dad had left me, they now intended to seize. I was enraged. The money wasn't the point here. In the big picture, Mark's estate wasn't worth much. They were attempting to exert control over me and take away the last remnant of my family. I had already been forced from their life, acted as though I didn't exist. They now sought to destroy the final remnant of my relationship with a person who genuinely cared about me. I wasted no time at all. We pulled together some money from the company and I used it to hire a lawyer. Claire and Jake immediately supported me. "We will work things out," I said. Jake said, "You are not alone in this battle." Their assistance was much appreciated. Those who genuinely cared about what had happened to me seemed to be on my side at last. It was a vicious court war. My parents' attorneys were brutal. They attempted to portray me as a cunning, ungrateful child who had used a sick guy. They did all in their power to undermine me, including claiming that I lacked the emotional maturity to handle an inheritance. It was emotionally and psychologically draining. I felt as though I was reliving all the years of rejection and disdain I had experienced as a child every time I entered the courtroom. This time, though, I wasn't alone myself. Late into the night, Claire assisted me in organizing paperwork and reviewing witness lists, while Jake utilized his connections to put us in touch with others who could attest to Mark's character and our closeness. We worked together to create a case that revealed the truth: that Mark's choice to abandon me was entirely his own, and that he loved me like a son. The judge ultimately decided in my favor after months of back and forth in the courtroom. My parents' case was dropped, and Mark's will was maintained. All I felt was emptiness. Mark did not return after winning. The hurt of losing him and the resentment of having to struggle for something that ought to have been easy were not lessened by it. Seeing my parents in the courtroom was the worst thing. My mother sat there stonily, not even trying to act as though she cared about the reality. It has nothing to do with Mark or his property. It was to discipline me for being disrespectful. The whole time, my dad hardly spoke. He simply had a worn-out appearance. It seemed as if he was following my mother's instructions. My dad lingered for a second, as if he wanted to say something, but then he followed her out the door once the trial was over. My mom passed by me without saying anything. I never again saw them in person after that. I kept just a few personal belongings that brought back memories of Mark when I sold his flat after the case. No amount of effort could make up for the void he left behind, but the money invested in the company gave us a much-needed lift to expand the business. I had never had a true family before Mark, and now he was gone. Finally, I thought myself, I could get away from my parents, that I would no longer have to think about them when I won the lawsuit. But I knew in my heart that it wasn't that easy. Losing didn't sit well with my mom, and I suspected she wasn't finished with me yet. When it came to her perception of herself, my mother was not the type to overlook anything. For her, losing the lawsuit meant more than simply a loss. She was determined to hold me accountable for the public humiliation. It appeared normal for a time. As normal as my life ever became, that is. With the funds from Uncle Mark's bequest, the company was finally getting off the ground. We began pitching to larger companies, recruited a few analysts, and renovated our office. We were finally being taken seriously, and it felt fantastic. Jake was occupied with courting each possible investor we encountered. Claire was managing the company's operations, while I was cultivating connections with our current clientele. I was overcoming my parents' shadow and making a difference. Then, without warning, the SEC knocked. The email arrived in my inbox when I was at work. A compliance officer informed us that we were the subject of an insider trading investigation. I was very perplexed. Insider dealing? There was no sense about it. In order to ensure that everything was above board, we had been quite careful about compliance. We certainly weren't criminals, and we weren't careless either. I initially assumed it had to be an error of some sort. Perhaps someone filed a fraudulent report, or there had been a mix-up. However, as the inquiry progressed, it became evident that this was not a random occurrence. An anonymous report was sent to the SEC alleging that the firm had traded on sensitive information from a tech company we had been doing business with for months. It was suspiciously timed. 2 suspects. This has my mother written all over it, was my initial thought. She had the contacts to make things happen, but she wasn't the kind to get her hands filthy. I was certain that she would utilize her decades-long ties with influential individuals to get this probe done. It was her method of attacking me in the areas that harmed my future, my livelihood, and my business. The inquiry was harsh. The SEC demanded documents, emails, and account statements in order to investigate every facet of the company's activities. It went beyond simply demonstrating that we had done nothing improper. It was about surviving while our reputation suffered. Some of our smaller clients were alarmed by the attack and closed their accounts. Others waited to see how things worked out before making more investments with us. It seemed like a new catastrophe every day. The story didn't end there. My dad's company stated they were starting a boutique brokerage firm a few weeks into the probe. It wasn't a coincidence, of course. With reduced costs and a staff of seasoned experts, they marketed their new company as the hygienic, reliable substitute for ours. It was a planned action intended to steal our customers and destroy us when we were weak. I wasn't shocked, but I was angry. My mom was like this. She had more in mind than winning. She was attempting to ruin me. She took Uncle Mark's inheritance from me. But that wasn't enough. She wanted to show that without her, I was nothing. Claire and Jake were as furious as I was. Ever the strategist, Claire began collaborating with our legal team to take the SEC inquiry on. Jake, however, thought of something else. One evening, as he paced the office, he said, "We need to pivot. They will destroy us if we continue to play by their rules. We must figure out how to maintain our lead." Even though Jake's plan was audacious and dangerous, it made logic. We would therefore turn our attention to a niche market that my dad's company couldn't penetrate, rather than attempting to compete with them directly. Fintech combined with cryptocurrency. It was a brand new area of finance with enormous development potential, but also a lot of instability and unpredictability. My dad's and other traditional businesses wouldn't handle it due to the regulatory issues. However, we were not afforded the luxury of being cautious. Claire wasn't convinced at first. The cautious one had always been her. In our trio, the voice of reason is a gamble. We'll crash with it if it crashes, she added. However, Jake and I were aware that we had no other option. If we only made conventional investments, my dad's company would take advantage of us. Our only option was to switch to cryptocurrency. We threw ourselves into it. The company was renamed as a forward-thinking company that specializes in high-risk, high-reward investments. We began focusing on cryptocurrency investors, business founders, and digital entrepreneurs. Those who were unconcerned about reputations or conventional conventions. Although it was a risk, it paid off sooner than anticipated. A young software millionaire who got his money in the cryptocurrency industry was referred to us by one of Jake's contacts. He was just what we needed as a customer, excited, motivated, and eager to collaborate with a company that understood the complex world of digital assets without the need for a PowerPoint presentation. We gained reputation in the cryptocurrency industry by acquiring him as a customer. Other investors quickly began approaching us. It wasn't exactly an easy transition. The regulations appeared to change every other day, and the cryptocurrency market was a crazy place. We needed to be cautious, keeping things legitimate while juggling enormous concepts. However, it was worthwhile. We not only recovered but also advanced in just 6 months. We weren't only waiting around. We were dominating an area that Mercer Financial could never hope to reach. The SEC inquiry continued in the meanwhile. Knowing that we were being investigated for something we hadn't done was draining, but we weren't going to give up. Claire put forth a lot of effort with our attorneys to establish our innocence, examining all of the material to demonstrate that the accusations were unfounded. Jake maintained the company's operations, assuring investors and clients alike. The SEC finally exonerated us of all accusations following months of back and forth. Since insider trading had never occurred, there was no proof of it. As we had suspected, it had all been a setup. However, we had already moved on by the time the inquiry was over. It must have angered my mother. Everything she owned was thrown at me: shady, sabotage, lawsuits. She also brought up my dad's business in her drama. However, it was still insufficient. She wasn't just outplayed by us. We changed the rules and created our own. I believed that I had finally emerged from her shadow. Even while I was happy with our win, I knew it wasn't the end. I suspected that my mother wasn't finished with me yet since she didn't give up lightly. Furthermore, the scars remained. I felt a mixture of sadness and rage each time I saw the list of clients we had lost throughout the inquiry. My parents had tried their hardest to ruin me, and it had worked for a time. They had cast doubt on all I had constructed. Additionally, some people fall for their falsehoods. However, the problem with folks like my mother is that they are unsure of when to give up. I began to hear rumors in the sector a few weeks after the SEC gave us the all-clear. My dad's business was having trouble. Their little brokerage failed because it couldn't compete with ours in the cryptocurrency market. They had razor-thin margins after their attempts to undercut us with cheaper fees had failed. In order to stay afloat, they were now subtly attempting to change course and imitating our company's business strategy. I ought to have been pleased, even validated, but I was just exhausted. My parents were more than simply an issue that needed to be resolved. They were a natural force. They always returned with something new, regardless of how many battles I won. Playing chess with an opponent who didn't care about the rules was like playing a never-ending game. Here's the problem, though. I had changed since the beginning of all of this. At that school, I wasn't the frightened child. When I tried to laugh off the remarks that went too deep, I was bullied. I wasn't the unfocused college kid who was trying to establish himself. Together with others who had faith in me, I had created something tangible. I also refused to allow my parents to pull me back into their poisonous environment this time. Our company kept expanding. A significant fintech company partnered with us, generating millions of dollars in additional revenue. Claire was spearheading discussions with a European investment fund that may broaden our global reach, while Jake was negotiating the opening of a second office in Los Angeles. The money wasn't the only factor in the success. I wanted to show myself that the Mercer name was not important. We were even invited to some of the most prestigious tech and financial events thanks to our crypto billionaire customer. I didn't miss the irony, not as their son, but as someone they couldn't claim credit for. I was here, entering places my parents would have murdered to be a part of. Nevertheless, my parents weren't finished despite all of the success. My mother began messaging once more. They were first passed off as olive branches, updated on the family. "They're pictures of my sister Lily," she said. "Story 4. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now. Hello, everyone. I'll go right in because I'm not sure how to begin. I've been putting this tale off for a long, and I'm not sure if that's because I've been too busy keeping my life together or because I'm still processing things. In any case, here we are. I am 48 years old, and my wife Donna is 47, a woman. We've been wed for 25 years, almost 25 years actually, whether that is still relevant at all. We have two wonderful children, a 20-year-old son serving in the military and a 22-year-old daughter completing college. Despite our imperfections, we managed to make life work. I also believe that we were a team for the majority of those years. However, the past 5 years or so have been difficult. I will not sugarcoat the situation. When her father died, Donna's mother had no one else to care for her once she got dementia in her early 60s. Donna then requested if she could move in with us. I'm not a monster, you see. Although I didn't particularly like the notion, I consented since I understood how essential it was to her. I was not aware at the time of how much it would drain us both. I'm speaking to anyone who has provided care for someone who has dementia. The days turn into a never-ending cycle of assistance, reminders, and cleanup. Imagine being worn out all the time while you watch someone you love deteriorate a bit more each day. Donna was the most affected. She was always anxious, fearing that she would become just as stressed as her mother during COVID. We felt as though we were imprisoned in a stress bubble. There was no getting around it because we both worked from home. Her mother would become irritated about a minor issue and lose it, or she would roam the house and forget where she was. I would sit there and reassure Donna that we were in this together when she would weep at night and occasionally tell me she didn't believe she could do it any longer. We've survived the worst of it, I thought, when her mom eventually went into a memory care facility early this year. The harm has already done, but things will improve now. Donna had changed. She felt bad about placing her mother in a different residence. She confided in me that she thought time was passing her by, as if she didn't have much time before dementia took over. I made an effort to comfort her, but nothing I said ever seemed to resonate. After the children were out of the home and her mother was looking after them, we had always discussed taking a trip. That was the strategy. Together, we would sell the house, resign from our jobs, and embark on a global tour. We had a timeline, too. 2023 summer. We put money aside for it. We spent years discussing it. I vividly recall Donna telling me that one day, it will simply be the wide road, you and me. She described waking up without a plan, sleeping in little bed breakfasts, and traveling through small villages. We would sit and imagine destinations for hours. We would visit the Grand Canyon, Italy, and Greece. Her expression would change as if she could already see it, and I took her word for it. I believed that was something we were both anticipating. I believed that we were still in agreement. Then one day, after returning home from a round of errands, I noticed a note on the kitchen table. At first, I didn't give it much thought. I thought she had given me some mail, but as I opened it, I felt sick to my stomach. I apologize, it said. I must discover who I am. I can't continue to live this way, even though I love you. Please make an effort to comprehend. When I'm ready, I'll return. What it was like to read that is beyond words. As if I couldn't comprehend the words I was seeing, I remained there for a minute, clutching the letter and attempting to digest it. Did she just walk out? No argument, no warning, no fight. Simply gone. I began analyzing things after taking a glance around the place. She was half naked. She missed some of her favorite things. She hadn't actually gone to spend a weekend with a pal. She went out. I attempted to contact her and got her voicemail. I also texted her, inquiring about her whereabouts and general well-being. No answer. My mind flew into overdrive, considering every scenario. Has something taken place? Was she secure? After that, I looked into our financial accounts. I saw it at that moment. She had embezzled the majority of our savings. It was more than simply her cash. Our money was involved. For the vacation we were meant to take together, we had saved money for years. The feelings I had upon seeing that number are beyond words. All of my emotions, shock, rage, betrayal, came at me at once. I was unable to concentrate for the following few days. She seemed to vanish off the face of the planet, despite my repeated attempts to contact her. Then, a week later, my daughter was pacing the kitchen while holding her phone and shaking her head as if she was incredulous at what she was seeing. She seems content, Dad. What does she look like? Joyful. She showed me the photo of Donna smiling with a group of strangers on her phone. Somewhere, Donna was sitting with sunglasses on a beach. I was surrounded by unfamiliar faces, complete strangers. Not a single face I recognized. I recall thinking when I gazed at their phony grins, who are these individuals? Like, with your entire family at home, how can you just show up and join a bunch of strangers? It said in the caption, "To freedom, cheers. Finding contentment and starting over." I'm not sure what freedom she believed she was celebrating, but it was definitely not mine. Is she completely unconcerned about us? My daughter's voice cracked as she asked. I was unsure of how to respond. What should I have said? That the lady who gave her a hug through every heartache, who sat at her soccer matches, and who reared her had just up and gone. I don't know, kiddo, I murmured, placing a hand on her shoulder. If only I had a response. She didn't weep. I don't even know who she is anymore, she mumbled instead. After that, she walked back to her room and shut the door. That was the hardest thing to strike me. My kid, who formerly looked up to her mother, treats her as though she's a complete stranger. The money wasn't the only factor. It was the decision she made to go. She didn't simply abandon me. Her family was abandoned by her. On the 25-year life we have created together, the impact this would have on our children didn't even concern her. I was left to pick up the pieces, but she didn't seem to care. I stared at my phone for days, hoping for a call, text, or whatever, but it never came. I began to comprehend something at that point that has been with me ever since. I didn't cause Donna to leave. She departed because she no longer wanted to be in charge. The actual chaos began at that point. The days that followed were chaotic. I discovered she had been preparing this for some time after looking through all of our joint accounts. She must have done a lot of planning for our vacation. She ended up owning that. She spent almost all of the money we had saved together over the years. Our future, poof, lost. I made another attempt to phone her, directly to voicemail. I texted, nothing. She seemed to vanish. At the time, my daughter, who was still in college, also made an effort to get in touch. One text message was returned to her. I need this, yet I love you, Donna said. When you're older, you'll comprehend. Tell your brother that I'm all right. You get it? Know what? That my wife simply left her family and life to play freely and unattached. Yes. No. When Donna began posting more on Instagram, things became worse. She wasn't just at any beach. We were expected to spend time together on cruises, go out to clubs, eat at upscale restaurants, and do other activities. She was accompanied in each photo by this bunch of individuals who were obviously irresponsible. How she found them is a mystery to me. Did I never meet them before, or were they some old friends, a group on the internet? I only knew that she appeared to be having a great time. Even bad were the captions. You only got one life, etc. Don't squander it. Be grateful for friends who encourage you. Raise yourself up. When we were interacting with her mother, where were they? When she cried at night, where were they? Worried that she would get dementia. Those pals must only be enjoyable when you have money to spend and nothing binding you. However, I lost my mind over one post. In fact, she expressed her gratitude to her wonderful spouse for understanding and supporting her during this journey. The want to hurl my phone across the room was strong. I had nothing to support. I had no idea where she was. It seemed as though she was attempting to depict me at home, grinning and waving her away, as though this was all a part of a larger scheme. I was frantically trying to find out how to pay the debts she left me in the interim. The mortgage was due. The utilities were the automobile payments. My wife stole the most of our money, but I didn't care. Although I had always been cautious with money, I never thought I would suddenly have to manage this home alone. A few weeks later, I began to see the wider picture. Donna didn't just discover who she was. She was fleeing the life we had created, the difficult moments, and the obligations. I now know that she had been harboring animosity for years, even though I had assumed we had been on the same page during this whole ordeal. And she ran away rather than speaking to me like a grown-up. My children and I got down to go over everything. I wasn't going to lie for her, but I also didn't want them to hear my resentful side. My kid was furious because he was stationed across the nation. It was in his voice that I heard. In fact, his voice was tight with frustration when he contacted me earlier. What the devil is happening, Dad? Mom is acting as like nothing is wrong, and I just received a text from her. She wrote and gave me a photo of a damn sunset. I hope all is okay with you, miss. Do you miss me? Even so, what does that mean? He stopped and I could hear him inhale to relax. Dad. She cannot act as though this is not a serious matter. She can't send me photos of sunsets as if nothing is wrong. You're correct. She doesn't, I informed him. Has she spoken to you then? Given you a valid explanation? I wanted to say something to calm him down, but I was at a loss for words. No, I said. She grabbed the money, left a note, and vanished. Dad, I don't understand. How is that accomplished? How can you simply abandon your family in that manner? Son, I'm not sure, I answered, attempting to maintain a steady tone of voice. I'm not sure. But what about my daughter? She was going through her mother's Instagram as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing, and she kept shaking her head. This isn't normal, she observed to her father. Mom is behaving like she's 25, rushing about with these individuals. I was thinking the same thing, but I didn't say it aloud. Donna has always had a slight obsession with maintaining her youthful appearance. She looked after herself, worked out, always try to look your best. That's what I used to adore about her. However, it appeared that she now wished to destroy the life that we had spent decades creating. The carelessness of it all. My psyche was bled. This woman had been whining for years that we couldn't do this or that because we had too many obligations, and now she was dismissing it all as if the rest of us were still here and still living in the same world. She chose to give up. I didn't expect her to be a martyr, but I also didn't imagine she would simply desert us. I was having trouble understanding that section. She had always been the planner and the well-organized person. Nevertheless, she didn't hesitate to leave everything behind. But that's what really grabbed me. Every few days she would contact our daughter, saying things like, I miss you. All I need is time. When I'm ready, I'll return. As if she were going on a spiritual retreat. She wasn't having fun with her new pals in Bali or wherever she had landed up. But what are you ready for? To return home and act as if nothing had occurred. After everything, she genuinely thought she could just stroll back into our life as if we had been waiting for her. The rage began to sink in at that point. I was first too surprised to feel anything other than bewildered. Now, however, I was beginning to recognize Donna's actions now. She wasn't simply disoriented or perplexed. She was acting self-centeredly. It's simple. She was completely mistaken if she believed that I would wait here indefinitely for her to come to her senses. I eventually began to come to terms with the fact that my wife was living it up on social media, like some influencer on a perpetual vacation, after observing her for a month. Not only did she leave, but her lack of guilt about it was what truly annoyed me. She would always publish something new, just when I felt she was beyond my ability to be surprised. Leaving is one thing, but projecting an air of freedom is quite another. Simply being true to yourself when your spouse is at home, becoming overwhelmed by expenses. Furthermore, your children are unsure about what to believe. She shared a video about her tale one day. It was a group of her female friends and a few guys. Someone was saying, Donna, you must stay with us for the New Year's party, in the background. Oh, I'm not going anywhere, she added. Now I'm free. Release the word once again, as if she had spent 25 years chained to something rather than married, raising children, and creating a life. It infuriated me. When I vented to a few close friends, they all had the same reaction. You should consult a lawyer. The problem was that I had previously done it. The week following Donna's departure, I met with my attorney. She informed me that since she hadn't actually abandoned anything but me, there wasn't much I could do legally at this point. I would have to wait for her to return, or at the very least make herself available to receive documents if I desired a divorce. I blocked all of her remaining credit cards in the meanwhile. Made sure her phone was off and frozen anything she might attempt to access. Our family's strategy. I was pretty smart about the phone thing, because she ended up dropping out of the plan entirely when I blocked international calls. Little triumphs, I suppose. My daughter contacted me a few weeks later. After she hung up with Donna, she gave me a call. Her voice was trembling with annoyance. I just need to get out of here before it's too late, Donna apparently told her. When you have your own family one day, you'll comprehend. That was the tipping point for me. Bless her. My daughter tried to reason with her. She expressed our collective hurt to Donna, how she couldn't simply flee this life. What was said by Donna? I have to be self-centered now. When I'm ready, I'll return. Selfish? I'm not joking. I saw her post shortly after we had that conversation. Something about being with her tribe in Bali. Her people? For her group of freeloaders, she had a new term. Right now. She sounded like she had read too many self-help books, I promise. In order to keep the house and cars paid for, I was working long hours and making sure our children didn't go completely crazy. Additionally, she was dancing barefoot with her new tribe at a beach bonfire. No obligations, no guilt. I actually began to wonder at one point if she had planned any of this before she left. Were these people she met online? Were they some sort of group that persuaded her to flee? It seemed to me that she had been getting ready for months as I gave it more thought. The trip must have been planned by her. These must have been the people she was speaking to. Hell, she probably quit her job weeks before I even noticed she was unhappy. But the thing is, whenever I tried asking her for an address to send her legal paperwork, because yes, I was done waiting, she texted back. We'll talk about it when I'm ready to come back. She actually believed she could just waltz back into our lives, like we'd all been sitting around waiting for her to find herself. I guess that Donna didn't think she'd done anything wrong. In her mind, this was all perfectly justified. She deserved this. And we were supposed to understand. The entitlement was insane. By the end of that month, I'd had enough. The anger was starting to outweigh the confusion. This wasn't some midlife crisis anymore. This was who she was now. And I wasn't about to sit here and play the role of the supportive husband. So the next day, I called my lawyer again. I told her I was ready to file for divorce. She has to find a way. No more waiting. No more hoping. I wanted out. She told me we couldn't officially file yet because Donna was still off-grid, but we could have everything ready to go. The papers were drawn up. Asset division repayment for the money she took. The whole thing. The lawyer explained that since I'd been keeping up with the mortgage and the bills alone, the courts would likely factor that in. The plan was simple. When Donna came back, because eventually she would, she'd get served. No explanations, no apologies, just paperwork. I'll be honest. Deciding to divorce her wasn't simple. You don't spend 25 years with someone and simply let it go overnight. But I wasn't the one who left. I wasn't the one who emptied our cash and uploaded photos with random people in Bali while my family picked up the pieces. Donna made her choice. Now I was cooking, my Thanksgiving was coming up, and I wasn't sure what to do at first. My daughter didn't want to remain home. Too many memories of family dinners with her mom. I didn't blame her. My son couldn't come back from his base, so there was just the two of us. Then out of nowhere, Donna's sister contacted me. She invited us to their place for Thanksgiving. I wasn't sure what to say at first. Wouldn't that be strange? When I showed up, I didn't want everyone to be gazing at me and wondering what Donna was doing. However, what her sister said resonated with me. Her decisions shouldn't prevent you from starting a family. I said, yes. The day before Thanksgiving, we made the drive to Donna's sister's house. Even though I was so anxious, it wasn't weird when we entered. It wasn't strange. My daughter and I were embraced by Donna's relatives, who pretended nothing had changed. I believe they were ashamed of Donna's actions, but nobody brought it up. They only greeted us and made an effort to make the day pleasant. I thought things could become strange when Donna's mother's name was spoken, but her brother put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You did right by her, man." Everyone is aware of that. I didn't feel totally alone for the first time in months. As my daughter and I ate and laughed with everyone at the table, I pondered whether Donna was even aware of what she had thrown away. We were there, but she wasn't. We continued to feel like a family. After we returned home, my daughter shared a simple Thanksgiving photo of her and her aunt and uncle grinning. Nothing spectacular, nothing suspicious. Until Donna texted my daughter 2 days later, I didn't give it any thought. I looked at the photo. "I hope both of you are doing well. I'm going to return for Christmas. Then, we'll speak." I didn't have to speak at all. "I just saw the text," my daughter remarked. "She is quite brave." I shook my head and grinned a bit. Donna was unaware that I would be prepared by Christmas. My lawyer and the paperwork were prepared, and when she returned expecting to speak, she was taken by surprise. I was surprised by how calm the weeks before Christmas were. Donna was not communicating with me. She was also posting less on Instagram. No photos of the beach. Nothing. No group dinners. She seemed to be winding down, but not in a positive manner. I began to wonder what she would do next. Did she believe that this brief reprieve would endure forever? As far as I knew, she was unemployed, homeless, and had spent the most of the money she had stolen. Perhaps she was being caught up by reality. Meanwhile, I was getting ready for her to come back. Together with my attorney, I ensured that the divorce documents were prepared. She clarified that the courts would take it into account because I had been paying the mortgage, bills, and other expenses. We would divide assets according to fairness, rather than what Donna believed she was entitled to, and she would owe me for what she stole. I also ensured that the home was secured. They replaced the locks. They changed the security code. Previously, the emergency key was concealed beneath the flower pot. Lost. I was not going to take any chances. When Donna returned, I had no idea what to anticipate. However, I was aware of one thing. She wasn't returning to my place as though she still lived there. Without placing too much pressure on my kid, I made an effort to keep her informed as much as possible. I didn't want to exacerbate her already existing anger toward her mother. She asked me one evening whether I believed Donna had intended to return for Christmas. "I'll be here," she said. I informed her. "I'm prepared for her. Is she likely to apologize?" I paused to consider that before responding. "I'm not sure, but even if she is, her actions remain unchanged." Donna texted me again a few days before Christmas. Brief and easy. "The 23rd is when I'll be in town. Let's have a conversation." That was it. Don't apologize, no justification. Let's just chat. I spent some time looking at the text, partly expecting to feel anything, perhaps anger, sadness. However, nothing was present. I was, if anything, relieved. I was relieved to have a plan at last, that I was no longer waiting around. I responded with a single text. All right. In actuality, there was nothing more to discuss. Donna was not yet aware of that, but she would. I was going to give her the divorce papers when she arrived at my house, expecting us to have a lengthy, tearful talk. This year's Christmas was going to be different, but I was prepared. I made sure everything was in order, cleaned the house, and then sat down to wait on the 23rd. Probably for the best, my daughter spent the night at her friend's house. I didn't want her to witness the impending disaster. My heart was racing when the doorbell finally rang, but I maintained a composed expression. Donna was standing there as if nothing had changed when I opened the door. She had a nice appearance. She always did, of course. However, there was a look in her eyes that suggested she might have thought I would be delighted to see her. At first, I remained silent. I simply gazed at her. "Hello?" With a little smile, she said, as if it were another day. I didn't return the smile. I picked up the manila envelope from the table behind me and gave it to her. "What is this?" she inquired. She was losing her grin. "Divorce documents," I said. As if she hadn't heard me correctly, Donna blinked. "What? Why?" "You left," I murmured, staring her in the eyes. "You made a decision. I own this. And that's it." The discussion was over. She was still as she stood. I'm not sure what she was expecting when she arrived, but it was definitely not that. I briefly feared that she might burst into tears, but instead she remarked, "You didn't have to do this," as she glanced at the package in her hands. I about lost it at just one line. "I didn't have to." I said it again. "You went out. You stole our money, fled with unidentified people, and pretended that I didn't mind. Donna, you are the one who accomplished this, not me." She seemed to be about to protest, but she stopped herself. In months, for the first time, I believe she recognized the extent of the situation. She took a little step back, as though she was unsure whether to enter or go. "May I enter?" At last, her voice became softer as she inquired. "No," I replied. I wasn't impolite. I wasn't being emotional or shouting. I had just finished. I've stopped letting her set the rules. I'm done allowing her to come and go from my life as if nothing had occurred. We just stood there for a while. I was at the doorway and she was on the porch. She gazed about as if she were surveying the house, the yard, the residence she had left behind. What was going through her head, I wondered. Did she regret it? Did she feel ashamed? Was she even concerned? Can we at least have a conversation? She inquired. Please. I sighed, not so much indignant as exhausted. Donna, there's nothing else to say. Everything you need to know is stated in the documents. Without saying another word, she gazed down at the envelope after giving me another long glance. She walked back to her car after turning. I saw her leave in her car. It was silent on Christmas Eve. We spent the evening wrapping a few presents and watching movies once my daughter got home. Donna wasn't mentioned by either her or myself. Both of us were sick of discussing it. My daughter once asked me whether she thought her mother would sign the documents. Sincerely, I answered, I don't know. But we're still going. Donna had left. Perhaps she had been gone for a long time before she really departed. Perhaps I was too preoccupied with keeping things together to see that the lady I married was already fading away, 1 year at a time. She was not returning anyhow. Not at all, and that was all right. Tidying up loose ends took up the next few weeks. I was informed by my attorney that we may proceed with the divorce, even if Donna didn't want to help. But I didn't think she would resist. She hadn't given much thought to the future since she had been too preoccupied with chasing sunsets and hazy notions of independence. Donna eventually signed the documents around the middle of January. Not a message, no justification. The bottom of the page just has her signature. My lawyer phoned to inform me that it was completed. I was not as relieved as I had hoped. It wasn't a momentous occasion for which I raised my fists in celebration. It was like shutting a door that was too long cracked open. Whatever it is she believes she is after, I hope she finds it. I do. It won't be with me, though. Life feels stable now that a few months have passed. It is quieter in the house, but in a pleasant manner. In the end, I sold it. Reduce your space so it doesn't feel so empty. I resumed my social life, acquired a few pastimes that I had previously neglected throughout the years. My children are also doing well. My son is doing well in the military, and my daughter will soon graduate. All of us have adapted to this new reality, and to be honest, it's better than I anticipated. I have no regrets about the years I spent with Donna. I have no regrets about the sacrifices, the difficult moments, or even the enjoyable ones. I regret believing that I had to keep everything together by myself, that in order to regain my life, I would have to wait for her to decide she was done discovering herself. I didn't. And I'm beginning to realize that at last, I want to share this with everyone who is going through a similar situation and is waiting for someone who has already made up their mind. You are not required to wait. When something is gone, you don't have to keep it. Sometimes the best course of action is to let go. And I did just that for myself. I appreciate you reading all the way through.